Hi, my name's Alison Butt and I attended Altringham's Girls' Grammar School from 1982 to 1989. I now live in Sydney, Australia. I moved out here in May 1996 and I currently work at the University of New South Wales. It's really great to have an opportunity to tell you a bit more about my career, how I got to do what I do, and how my experiences at AGGS have helped me shape my career. So let's start off with answering some questions about my time at school. Although I really enjoyed English literature and language and history at school, probably my favourite subject was biology, and that was because I had a really great teacher, Mrs. Lee, who made the subject really fun and interesting. Apart from probably common things like having disagreements with my friends, which didn't happen very often, but they were difficult when they occurred, I found some of my studies difficult, particularly maths, physics and chemistry, just because they were hard and I never seemed to be able to do well in tests and exams and things. One very valuable thing I learnt at school was that if I put the time and effort into studying a subject, I'm much more likely to succeed. I remember one occasion spending a lot of time revising for a chemistry exam and I actually got a pretty good mark at the end, so the effort paid off. So moving on a bit more about my career path. So first a bit about my current role. As I mentioned, I work at the University of New South Wales. I'm the Director of the Research Strategy Office. My office is responsible for helping UNSW researchers to get money to carry out their research. We identify particular grant schemes that would best suit their research and we help them develop competitive applications for that funding. So for most of my career, I've been a medical researcher with a special focus on cancer research. And the steps I took to get into this career were, firstly I went to the sixth form and I studied for A-levels. Then I went to 2 universities to complete an undergraduate degree and a postgraduate PhD. Then I started my first job, which was here in Australia, working in a laboratory in Adelaide. That job was meant to be for 3 years, but after about 18 months I moved to another laboratory-based job in Sydney. I've spent about 15 years working in laboratories at various medical research institutes in Sydney and building up a research team in the cancer field. Then in 2011 I moved out of research and I took up a position as Director of Research at the National Breast Cancer Foundation, which is a very large charity which raises funds for breast cancer research. My role there was to oversee the allocation of about $20 million a year in funding, so setting up funding schemes and overseeing the application process for funding to ensure that only the best researchers can receive money to continue their research. So while it was sad to not be carrying out the research myself, I really enjoyed helping great research projects become funded and carried out and ensuring that the money raised could be spent in life-saving research. So after that, I worked for the federal government in a cancer control agency called Cancer Australia as a senior scientist. And there I was involved in developing government policy around the best way to diagnose, treat and manage those living with the diagnosis of cancer. Governments often employ scientists or those with a scientific background to ensure that their policies have strong scientific evidence to support them so that they'll be the most effective. After 3 years working in government, I started my current position at UNSW about a year ago. So, a bit more about my qualifications. I was the last year to complete O-levels, so in addition to the compulsory maths, English literature and language and French, I did history, geography, music, biology and chemistry, and I got 6 A's and 3 B's in my O-levels. My A-level subjects were biology, English literature, history and general studies, and I got 4 A's. So I then went on to the University of Nottingham to study genetics, as that was what I'd most enjoyed from my A-levels. I can't remember what grades I needed to get to go to the University of Nottingham. I think it was probably a B and 2 C's. So after I finished my degree, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do next in terms of where I wanted to work or what I wanted to do, so I decided to do some further study and study for a PhD. And I went to the University of Bristol to do a PhD in molecular pathology. and my focus was in colorectal cancer. I'd really enjoyed studying cancer during my undergraduate degree. So my background, particularly my A-levels, are probably rather unconventional for a career as a scientist, as I did do a couple of art subjects, and I did have to do a starter course in chemistry when I started my degree, as I hadn't done chemistry at A-level. But actually, I think being able to analyse information and be able to write coherently, which are the skills I learnt through my history and English literature A-levels, have actually proven to be really useful in my career, as many parts of my previous and current roles have really relied on those skills. So moving on to my current job. For the first time in my career, I actually work with researchers across all disciplines at UNSW, rather than just focused in a medicine or science area. So I work with engineers, mathematicians, historians, astrophysicists on a daily basis. I might be presenting a seminar about a particular grant scheme and how to put together a good application, or I might be working one-on-one with a researcher, reviewing their draft application and providing them with some strategic advice on how to make it as competitive as possible. Probably the best part of my job is the variety and learning about really amazing research that is happening right across the university and beyond, Australia and globally, which are really in fascinating areas, much beyond my own sort of rather narrow experience in cancer research. The best bit is when researchers are successful and they get awarded funding to continue their research. And a particular career highlight was actually finding out relatively recently that 3 of our researchers had been awarded really competitive, highly prestigious fellowships, and this was after they'd all applied unsuccessfully several times in the past, so that was a real high point. Probably one of the worst things about my job is seeing researchers, and some of whom I've actually worked with and know very well, be unsuccessful in their funding because it's so competitive, and obviously seeing their disappointment and understanding as an ex-researcher what that disappointment really feels like is really hard. But I try and remain positive. I help them work through any feedback they may have received and encourage them to reapply with a better application in another round. So skills that are important for my role. I think being an ex-researcher and having worked in the research area for over 25 years really helps enormously in my current role, because I understand the research funding process, and I understand that from many different perspectives, both as a researcher who has applied for funding in the past, but also as working for a research funder, so understanding what funders are really looking for when they develop applications. I mentioned before that my background in history and English literature has helped throughout my career in being able to analyse and summarise large amounts of information, to be able to write coherently and concisely. These are really important skills that I've really had to draw on and utilise through many of my different careers. I have to be able to work calmly under pressure. My office receives large numbers of research applications to review and provide advice on. Researchers can get very stressed, particularly close to a deadline, so you have to be able to work efficiently and remain calm to get the job done in time. So I probably learned at school to be quite organised in my time. This could be around maybe a homework assignment or revising for exams particularly. I think I used to use a schedule and make sure that I tried to stick to it as much as possible, so that I didn't just focus on the subjects or the parts of homework that I really liked and enjoyed, or ended up rushing a piece of work when the deadline was due. So those are things that I think are really important. So finally, some top tips. My advice would be to consider pursuing the subjects that you enjoy most at A-level, and if you're going on to university, to go on to study things that you really enjoy. I think there are a lot more options for university degrees now than there were when I studied, where they tended to be single subject focused. Now I think you can combine lots of different subject areas that you enjoy, and if you're interested in those, I think sort of putting together a degree that works for you and it interests you, I would definitely advise that. So I wouldn't worry too much about being too rigid in selecting your subjects. As I mentioned, I had quite an unconventional subject areas for A-levels, and I went on and didn't really have any issues with that in my career. Obviously, there are some degrees like medicine which are a lot less flexible in the entry requirements than others, but there seems to be, as I say, far more options for interesting combination degrees nowadays, so I'd certainly advise you to follow your interests in the kind of A-level subjects and degrees that you might want to go on and study. And one of the most important skills that I've used throughout my career is learning how to network and broaden my contacts away from the particular area, discipline or focus that I'm studying or working in. So it's particularly important for scientists. We need to collaborate to be successful, and network building is really critical to do that. Networking is really about being interested in what other people are doing, their experiences, and making meaningful connections with them. I've also benefited from having some really great mentors throughout my career. These are people that I look up to, I can talk to about where I'm at with my career, what the next move might look like, or even talking through ideas to get their input. And both of these skills, I think, start with being able to open up conversations and being interested in the people around you. Probably the most rewarding parts of my career have been the opportunities to travel, to live, to work in another country, in another culture, which of course is now my home. And also, I think, a strong sense of satisfaction that I've had a chance to work in an area that can really make such a difference to people's lives. So I hope you enjoy your World of Work Day, and I wish you all the very best in your future careers.